Well, and I had somebody ask me recently, what do you mean by unpacking? And I mean, like, literally getting a suitcase and you unpack it. You take everything out, you examine it, you look at it, you wash the dirty clothes,
You
and then you
what you're
decide
gonna
what
keep.
you need to
Yep.
keep. You get rid of the things you don't need for the next trip. You know, you wipe out the dirty stuff, and usually I'll discover that I'm missing a sock, or, you know, my kids did something in my suitcase, or, you know, chocolate melted whatever.
Something is in there that you didn't put in there, which is a lot of what we're dealing with, right? We're looking back at our religious upbringing
TSA.
and going, I didn't ever want this in my life.
Right.
How did this get here? And doing some looking back and go, oh,
See, and
I get it.
For me, it's more like my suitcase got targeted for an extra security search, and TSA was not kind in there. Unpacking Mormonism is a subsidiary of Daisy Girl Communications, LLC. All content herein is intended for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice or counsel of your personal care provider. One of the most commonly misunderstood words with regards to mental or behavioral health is codependence or codependency. Our intent today is to explore what codependency actually is and how we try to control our environment and relationships and the things in our life that we really don't have control over out of a fear of Satan. Because I, Sarah Westbrook, believe that Mormons and a lot of other religions are codependent on Satan. Welcome back to Unpacking Mormonism
There's the
and
words with that. Join us now.
other religious drama. Thank you, Mason. I'm your host, Sarah Westbrook, joined by that noisy person over there, Mason Westbrook.
I'm the noisy one?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, you are.
All right.
You do so much talking. I never get a word in edgewise.
Ain't that the truth?
That's funny.
If you have to say that's funny, I'm not sure.
Oh my gosh, I'm like fighting. I want to say that's funny again, and I'm trying to find something else, and nothing else is coming. Okay.
That's funny right there. That's funny.
Oh, goodness. Alrighty. So it is my Friday. I mean, I know that for those of you listening, you might not be listening on a Friday, but it is a Thursday night in the Daisy Girl Communications recording studio. And it's my Friday. I get to leave tomorrow morning with a good friend of mine to go to Florida and take a week away from my children. And y'all, pray for, send up good vibes, wish Mason the best. This will all be coming to you, Mason, after the week. So absorb it during your week of recovery, okay?
I'll absorb the fact that it's going to come, right?
He needs help because he is going to be taking care of the 5 children that we have still living at home for the first half of that week. And then the second half of the week, we're flying the teenagers that still live in the household out to Florida with me, and we're taking them to Harry Potter land or world or whatever it is, the magical wizarding world of Harry Potter. I think that's what it's called. But anyway, we're going to the theme park in Orlando, y'all, with the teenagers, and Mason is going to be alone with the 3 youngest children. And it's going to be rough because Abigail's school has called us almost every day the last 8 school days to let us know that she's having another bad day. So, Mason, good luck. And I challenge you to work through the codependent tendencies that you will have towards those little kids of ours.
Yeah.
That was a prolonged silence.
Well, I've done this before, of course, and I'm grateful to be able to do that. I'm grateful that you're able to get away, and I think that it is important for me as a father to be able to manage and to do those things. And
yeah, absolutely.
There's a comedian that talks about how men and women think differently about that. Like, my wife comes to me and says, "Hey, I'm going to leave for the weekend. Can you take care of the kids?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And then he says, "Now, I've learned that means something different to a woman than it does to a man." And let me tell you what it means to me. If she comes home and all of my children are still alive, it's a success.
I remember I was pregnant with Landon, who is 11 now, and I went to Hawaii for I was in graduate school, and I went to Hawaii for one of my practicums for my master's degree because I was supposed to go to Minneapolis for it, but I would have been in Minneapolis on my due date. And since I come early, I was like, yeah, no.
That's a bad idea.
Not doing that. I'm going to be taking that semester off. And I did not want to postpone my graduation, and there was another class I couldn't take. So I got special permission to do that practicum a little bit early because of the health thing. And so I was like, I'm going to Hawaii. So I went a week early so that I could tour. Was it a week, Mason, or I think it was a week. I think I was gone 2 weeks.
You were gone for 2 weeks, yeah. I don't remember what the timeline was for
whatever
leaving,
the
but you were
timeline
gone
was,
for 2 weeks. Yeah.
But I was gone for 2 weeks. So Mason took leave from the military, and I flew home I had a wonderful time, y'all. I was a very pregnant woman, and I was solo. Like, I went to the Polynesian Cultural Center solo. I was like big pregnant, and you walk in the doors and there's all these like super young Polynesian men in their, costume. Ooh. And they're all Mormon. They're all like BYU Hawaii students. And I literally grabbed one of them, like they're getting ready to take our picture. And just before she snapped the camera, I like pulled this poor kid in really close to me and like hugged him. And so I've got this picture of me being grossly pregnant with this look of absolute horror on the poor kid's face. I paid for that picture, y'all. It was hilarious, but I thoroughly enjoyed it because I'd gotten a break from the kids. And I flew home on a Sunday. And Mason, you were serving at the time as the first counselor in the bishopric of our ward in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And I remember I got off the plane and landed in Raleigh early in the morning. And then I drove to Fayetteville. And so I showed up at the church house. I went straight from the airport to the church house because I wanted to see my kids. Oh my goodness, after 2 weeks, those pregnancy hormones and my need for my kiddos. Not so much for you, sorry, Mace, but those mama hormones were just aching. And I walk into the church and you're sitting on this stand and I sit down next to somebody because our kids are up, sitting in between two other women that were helping you man the masses for the day. And I sat down and a lady leaned over and she goes, "It's a good thing you're home. Have you seen your kids?" And I just chuckled because Katie's hair was all over the place and her dress was on backwards. And the boys had like the Dennis the Menace thing and their faces still had mud streaks and breakfast mustaches and whatever. And you caught my eye and you looked relieved that I was home. It was like watching my husband take a weight off of his shoulders. And, I loved you. In that moment, it was like, ah, I get that. All right.
So how about we talk about the topic for tonight, huh?
Yeah. No, let's just talk about Hawaii. It was amazing. Okay. So let's talk about codependence. So usually, and even I Googled it, and even on Google, it misleads you as to what codependence means. So the non-official definition is that people will take codependence to mean the same thing as over-dependence on somebody. Right. And from a mental health perspective, that is not what that word means. And so it's pretty common for me, and I actually had this happen recently where a client is talking to me about codependence, and their thought are things like I'm in charge of all the money. I'm in charge of all of these things, and my partner isn't. They might be not engaged or passed out on the couch or, whatever the case may be. And that codependence almost means things like you don't know how to function on your own.
Right.
And that makes you codependent.
Which
and
is
that's
really
not what it
more
means.
dependency.
Right. That is dependency or unhealthy dependency or over dependency. Whereas if you go to the mental health, Mason, what is that website that I shared with you? Mental Health America, and we talk about codependency, and the way that they spell this is CO-dependency. And they talk about it as a relationship addiction, and really where we dig into what does it mean to be codependent from a mental health perspective, which is where the term was coined, I believe. I might be wrong on my history here, but I like my story, so I'm sticking to it. And that was in the book Codependent No More, written by Melody, and I'm going to say her last name is pronounced Beattie, so Melody is in a melodious musical melody, and Beattie, Beattie. And one of the interesting things is that this book was first published in 1986, and it is still one of the most recommended books in my field of Codependent No More. And I love the subtitle because the subtitle really defines what codependency is, and that is how to stop controlling others and start caring for yourself. And so codependency, according to Melody Beattie, and the way that I view this, and for the purposes of today's podcast, is a phenomenon that occurs when there are traumatic behaviors in a relationship, and it shifts the relationship dynamic because of those traumas. So Melody Beattie identified it in the sober partner of an alcoholic. So meaning the alcoholic is causing pain and strain. There might be violence in the relationship because of the alcoholism. There might be you're absent, but all of the things that go with the addiction of alcoholism. And one of the phenomenons was that when people would start working with the families of alcoholics, they found that the sober person the sober counterparts had these really toxic relationship behavioral patterns that presented in a need to control everything about the addict's life. So where are you going? What are you going to do? I'm going to follow you. I'm going to stalk you. I'm going to make sure that I'm watching everything you eat and drink. I'm going to grill you. I'm going to lecture you. I'm going to yell at you. I'm going to emotionally abuse you. It was this need to have too much control and to overfunction in order to protect yourself from being harmed by, and harm meaning emotional harm, physical harm, sexual harm, spiritual harm, you name it, harmed by the person who had the alcoholism. And once she wrote this book, Codependent No More, like if you read this book, Codependent No More, you are still going to see a pervasive pattern of control, but with relation to alcoholism. So the sober partner's response and shift in relationship dynamics from as they interact with somebody with alcoholism. Not that we're blaming the alcoholic for the dysfunction, but just that's where it originally came from. So moving forward now, we begin to see this same codependent-like behavior in all areas of trauma, all areas of fear. So, for example, let's say that, I could actually use this with my relationship with my father. So for those of you who have listened to our podcast in the past, I've mentioned that once my father found out that I had had sex at age 16, which he absolutely was not okay with, he began to have an over control of my life to the point of I was held captive in my own home. I wasn't allowed to leave unless my mother was with me. I was pulled out of high school. The only place I was allowed to go was seminary and to work. And when I went to seminary, my mom sat in the parking lot. When I went to work, I had spies at work to make sure that I went home. If I wasn't working or if I didn't show up, somebody was supposed to call my family right away. It was insane. It was an insane amount of control and emotional abuse and emotional manipulation in order to have power over the person that you do not want to be hurt by. And one of the things in my experience and the way that I observed my father is that he was so embarrassed to have a Mormon daughter who was not on this high pedestal that it was better for me to disappear than to embarrass him further. And so that was very difficult.
We see that a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. We see that in all kinds of relationships and whatnot. So I find it very interesting that on this Mental Health America, they talk about, so I'll just read this on here. So Mason's going to have the link for this page in the show notes. But it says, let's see, codependency is a learned behavior that can be passed down from one generation to another. It is an emotional and behavioral condition that affects an individual's ability to have a healthy, mutually satisfying relationship. It is also known as relationship addiction because people with codependency often form or maintain relationships that are one-sided, emotionally destructive, and or abusive. The disorder was first identified about 10 years ago as a result of years of studying interpersonal relationships in families of alcoholics. Codependent behavior is learned by watching and imitating other family members who display this type of behavior. And then this goes on to talk about codependency affect, and affect spelled with an A. So we're talking about that emotional expression inside of things. What is a dysfunctional family and how does that lead to codependency? And they talk a lot about addiction, the existence of physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, and chronic mental or physical illness being a trigger point for somebody to develop this need to control everything around them in order to have a feeling of safety within their environment. And it presents not only in your interpersonal relationships, but also in those spiritual relationships. And that's really what we are going to dig into today, because I believe that in a lot of ways Mormons behave, and I'm going to say Mormons because again that's my experiential wheelhouse, that's my experiential expertise because I was born and raised Mormon, but I see a lot of crossover of codependent behaviors in Mormon members who truly believe and follow things to that letter of the law.
The mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank, and like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
Well, I have a thought just that it's interesting as you describe codependency, particularly in alcoholism, because that's the way that Melody Beattie describes it. On the surface, it almost makes sense. You have this traumatic situation going on in your life. In this case, an alcoholic spouse that is maybe abusive, certainly destructive. And so your natural instinct is to try and control your environment. The thought process that I've seen, I have never experienced this, but I've seen in, movies and stuff, the idea that if you can control things, don't make dad angry, right? Don't make dad angry. If we can control things to the point dad doesn't get angry, then life is going to be okay. The problem really comes into the fact that it's an unrealistic expectation. You cannot control everything, and all of your efforts, while they might succeed sometimes, are going to ultimately fail because you cannot control someone else, and you cannot control your environment so much so that you don't have these huge fallouts that then essentially make everything feel like it was completely worthless to do all that effort.
Right. Well, and, I kind of have to, shout out to John Larson over at Mormon Stories. Their, was it their January one, I think? I have actually been...
It's episode number 1720. And yeah, it came out in January.
Yeah, so the...
From Mormon Stories.
Mormon Stories episode. Mason, what's the title of that one so we can make sure that our listeners can head over there and take a look? I would highly recommend this. Again, John Larson is my favorite guest over at Mormon Stories podcast. I absolutely love his raw nature. I love that he gets up on his soapbox, and I love that he just says what he thinks. Even if I disagree with it, I just absolutely love his passion and whatnot. But in this episode, I'm like, dang it, John, you stole my thunder, because this is actually a theory, something that I have been working on for about 5 years on my own time. So I don't have any, raw research data. This isn't like some formal study that I've been
formulating
doing.
The ideas
It's
in your
been
head.
something that I've formulated in my head. I've actually thought about maybe doing my doctoral dissertation on this if I go back for my doctoral degree.
Y'all.
This is serious. This is so fascinating to me. And that is that the fear of a devil or Satan or evil influences or evil spirits, how that fear can take control of our lives and can be used as a tool for manipulation. And it's just fascinating to me to see the crossover of, mental health diagnosable codependency behaviors and this need to control your environment. A lot of people say, oh yeah, that's toxic perfectionism. Well, toxic perfectionism, codependency, these things grow out of a very severe form of anxiety because our environment is unpredictable and does not feel safe. And, what John Larson was saying was, these things are hardwired in our reptilian brain. And what John Larson is talking about is your survival instincts within your amygdala, within the limbic system of your brain. And yes, he's right. These things, this anxiety, this discomfort comes because we don't feel safe. If I've got a partner that is blowing the budget on alcohol and coming home and passing out or getting in car accidents or disappearing, we don't even need to go into and they're abusing me. Like even those alcoholics that do not become angry or mean, but they just cannot seem to get away from the alcohol. That is scary for me. It makes my environment unpredictable. And when I am scared, my amygdala is activated, and it's supposed to be. Like, we don't want to turn that off. We want to learn how to manage it in a healthier way. So our very human responses, if we can normalize them, understand them, I feel like I'm a broken record here. Normalize, understand, lean into that, and then learn, grow, and become different, then we can respond to that unpredictable environment very well. I would say...
That's the whole point.
Yeah, I would say in my own life, I had a time period of severe codependency when our son Brigham was very, very little because he would stop breathing and turn blue constantly. And we had no idea why. And I remember walking around with a nebulizer, like a portable nebulizer everywhere I went. We had a nebulizer at home. We went to the emergency room constantly. I was very emotional and controlling at the doctor's offices. I struggled with exaggerating at the doctor's offices, just trying to get them to do something different. So I was exaggerating as a way to try and control the treatment, which made them not believe me as much about what was going on because it was so fantastical. It was unbelievable.
Right.
And so, yeah, I can say that even in my own life, when I was dealing with very severe, chronic, life-threatening illness in my second son, I spent those first few years of Briggs' life, I was an absolute emotional mess. So, I mean, it was for a lot of reasons, but Briggs' medical needs did not help that.
Well, and you say that wasn't my experience, that you didn't seem completely unraveled, but I know that inside you were certainly struggling. Dealing with Brig and trying to get him healthy and safe was tough. And the first 5 months of that you did on your own. 6 months of that you did on your own.
Yeah, it was
or at least I wasn't
6
home.
months.
You had good friends, but I wasn't there.
Right. Mason was deployed to Iraq. So whenever Mason gets deployed with the military, I adopt a child. And so, yeah, Mason left.
Hence the retirement.
Right. Mason left. Yeah, if you go again, I don't adopt dogs while you're gone. I adopt kids while you're gone. No, Mason left in June on Father's Day, the year that Brig was born. And Brig was born the end of July. And Mason did not come home until right after the new year, the following year. And so, yeah, I did that alone for about 6 months. And I just remember being in a constant state of fear for his life, which turned me into somebody that needed to control everything around me in order to avoid real and imagined threats to Brig. Mostly because he would stop breathing and I couldn't see what had caused it. Turns out that kid had ginormous adenoids and tonsils and really severe allergies to grass and the formula that we were feeding him. So his allergies were inflaming everything, and they pulled his tonsils and adenoids out and put him on some nasty formula called Nutramigen. Squirrel. I know, Mason, I'm squirreling. Mason's rubbing his forehead like, oh my gosh, Sarah. Y'all are getting a whole life story today, okay? So anyway, but yeah, Brig was allergic to everything, and once we finally got things under control with an allergist immunologist, and his tonsils and adenoids came out, his life turned around, and breathing was no longer our daily struggle. So I think he was about 9 months old when they took his tonsils and adenoids out. He was very
just his adenoids.
Young. Yeah, you're right. They took his adenoids out, and then they took his tonsils out about 9 months later. You're correct.
So the original question that she asked like 15 minutes ago now was, what was the title of that episode? I'm not sure how we got here. Obviously still a little codependent on her status. It's my
Friday.
Obviously a little still codependent on her status as a mother of a special needs child. And I think that is something that is healthy for us to recognize because we do try to control our environments as much as possible because we recognize how much the world explodes when those special needs children, and it's certainly not exclusive to special needs children, but when those special needs children do not have the environment that is what they're expecting, things can explode, and it becomes very, very difficult for us as parents. The title is, Why Don't More Mormons Leave the Church? And what was really interesting about it is he doesn't talk so much about... John Larson doesn't talk so much about Satan, like we're going to try and get into a little bit. But he does talk about all of the conditioning that goes into the fear that goes into being afraid of leaving the church. And there's a couple of verses I think we'll probably get to here that I've pulled from the Bible and the Book of Mormon, but just this conditioning that we are taught to fear leaving the church. And Satan falls into that a lot as well, which I'm sure you'll talk about. But so that was the name of it. It was a very good podcast, very good in helping people like me kind of see some of the reasons why I'm still hesitant to move one way or the other, really. Not just hesitant to leave the church, but hesitant to really re-engage in the church. So it was very good in helping us with that.
Yeah, so we are doing something different tonight. We're not copying John Larson, but hey, shout out to John Larson. Episode what, Mason?
I don't know.
You just
I told
said
you
it
already. 1720, yes.
1720.
So Mormon Stories,
Why
right?
won't
John
they
Larson was on it.
leave
It's John
Mormon
DeLynne's Mormon
Stories?
Stories.
Go
Kara
listen,
Burrell's
it's
on
amazing.
there.
Yeah, they do a good job over there.
Terrific podcast.
Okay, so the question then is, what does this mean with regards to Satan? So come on, Sarah, what on earth do you mean by this, that we, as Mormons or as religious people might be codependent on Satan? And really, I want to reiterate, the codependency comes because your environment feels scary, unpredictable, out of control, etc., 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 which leads you to have a defensive survival mechanism response, or what I call an amygdala response from the brain. And then codependency is, now I have to overfunction and hyper control the things in my environment to avoid real or imagined threats to myself or my family. So Mason, why don't you go ahead and jump into some of those scriptures, or talk a little bit about where this conditioning, where this indoctrination about how horrible Satan is comes from the religious perspective. Come on, walking quad, let's do this.
Yeah, not today at all. Let me see if I can. There's a couple of things that I'd like to read, and just you can kind of stop me, and we'll go from there. One of the first things that came to mind is in the Book of Mormon. It's in Alma chapter 12, verse 14, and this is either Alma or Amulek. This is Alma. He says,
it's Joseph Smith, but sure.
For our words will condemn us, yea, all our works will condemn us. We shall not be found spotless, and our thoughts will also condemn us. And in this awful state we shall not dare to look up to our God, and we would fain be glad if we could command the rocks and the mountains to fall upon us to hide us from his presence. No specific reference to Satan in there, and I'm not sure if anything I have here will do that, but the idea being that it's kind of hopeless.
You
maybe?
are not allowed to move left or right or up or down or diagonal without being condemned.
Well, it's very black and white, right? He says, we shall not be found spotless. Like the whole point of Christianity, really the whole point of Christianity, and even Mormonism will emphasize this, the centerpiece of Christianity is the atonement of Jesus Christ. The fact that he came here to suffer and die for our sins so that we could be cleansed. But here in the Book of Mormon, where you're supposed to get the most comfort and instruction in that process.
Right, because it is the most true book out there, according to Joseph Smith.
You're supposed to be getting the
this is the end all be all.
Best look at these doctrines. There's multiple times, and I'm not going to say that this is the overarching theme. I've heard people say that. I'm not going to say that. But it is a theme, because there's other verses I can pull out too. But the idea that we will not be found spotless, that everything that we do essentially condemns us. Because if you're talking about my words, my thoughts, and my actions, I'll tell you, I have words, thoughts, and actions on a daily basis that are probably not okay. Well, and so I find, if I'm paying close attention to this on a daily basis, I'm left with guilt and shame over my behavior.
Right, and I think this goes back to what we did on the last time that we recorded, Mason, where we talk about what is sin anyway, because this is really difficult. If I have a thought that's maybe not a nice thought, one of the things that we're coming to understand and realize within the study of neuroscience is that these thoughts can come into our mind and we don't have control over that first thought that comes in. Like those initial thoughts, those initial emotional reactions, they're firing faster than our cognitive awareness could even keep up.
Right.
And suddenly I'm sinning because I had this thought of like, you know what? I really hope you poke yourself in the eye. Oh, shit. Now I got to repent. Oh,
Right.
shit. I got to repent.
Or you can't tell a joke because to be witty and tell a joke, you're going to be stepping back. Shoot, I probably shouldn't have said that. It was a joke, right?
I said shit. You said shoot.
I did say shoot. Thanks for emphasizing that.
You're welcome. Goody two-shoes.
There's another verse in the New Testament that kind of says the same thing. It's shorter, but I want to say it simply because this is not just a Book of Mormon thing. It's a Christian thing.
Oh, I want to pause you real quick and just kind of reinforce that. So yes, when I see this phenomenon of fear of Satan or fear of evil influences, I see this across multiple religions. So I see it in high demand, I'm going to butcher the word, evangelism. Hey, I didn't.
Evangelicals.
The high demand evangelicals, I've seen it in some of the Southern Baptist organizations that I've been close to, and some of them not so mild. That's kind of like that, congregation hit or miss, kind of like Bishop Roulette. You've got congregation Roulette. Yeah. I've seen this in Catholicism. I see this in OCD tendencies. Yeah. In people who are atheists. Like, this is not exclusive to Mormonism. This is not exclusive to religion. The idea that if I touch something that might be bad for me, my whole world is going to explode on me.
And a reminder real quick, this is unpacking Mormonism. This is not dismantling. This is not destroying. This is unpacking Mormonism and other religious trauma. We're not here to tear any church apart. Right. We're here to recognize that there are toxic pieces of what we're taught and help us to be able to recognize them and then be able to work through them and overcome them so that we can heal ourselves.
Right. Well, and I had somebody ask me recently, what do you mean by unpacking? And I mean like literally getting a suitcase and you unpack it. You take everything out, you examine it, you look at it, you wash the dirty clothes,
right.
And then you decide what you need to keep. You get rid of the things you don't need for the next trip. You wipe out the dirty stuff, and usually I'll discover that I'm missing a sock or, my kids did something in my suitcase or, chocolate melted whatever.
Something is in there that you didn't put in there, which is a lot of what we're dealing with, right? We're looking back at our religious upbringing TSA. And going, I didn't ever want this in my life. Right. How did this get here? And doing some looking back and go, oh, see, and
for me, it's more like my suitcase got targeted for an extra security search, and TSA was not kind in there.
So the verse is from Matthew chapter 12, verses 36 and 37, and this is Jesus talking. He says, "But I say unto you that every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account thereof in the day of judgment. For by thy word thou shalt be justified, and by thy words thou shalt be condemned." But I want to point out some of the important words there. Every idle word, those kind of things, you shall give an account for every idle word. And that's unrealistic.
Maybe that's why Eric doesn't talk much, because
it's unrealistic because we are human.
Yes.
So someone who let me move right into a different verse here. Maybe the most famous verse from the New Testament is John 3:16 that says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but shall have everlasting life." Well, let me read the very next verse, which isn't quite so famous. The next verse says, "For God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved." So this message of he is here to save us is almost sometimes swallowed up in all the other things that almost feel like religious control.
Oh, absolutely.
Almost, they feel like I'm throwing this out at you so that, I think it was John Larson again, not in this podcast, but in a previous podcast, that said that the church needs us to feel broken. And I think that's kind of what I'm seeing here with Satan.
Right. It doesn't come from John Larson, but he does quote it a lot. I can't remember where that quote comes from.
Okay, I remember it from a podcast.
I think it's one of the great philosophers that. Yeah.
I don't know. I just remember him saying it from the podcast, and I don't remember him referencing it. So you may be right.
But I am.
But the idea that the beautiful message that is supposed to come from Jesus as the Savior is swallowed up in the church's desire to control our lives and scare us into submission.
Well, and within Mormon doctrine, the very plan of salvation is, look at this bad guy, look at this good guy. Which one are you going to follow? Okay, there's a huge war in heaven.
Right.
A third of our, angelic, whatever, pre-bodied spirits went with Satan, and how horrible that is, because Satan was trying to control everything, and Jesus was like, let them choose on their own. We've always had this good versus evil complex within Mormonism. It's there in the very fabric of the story. And I mean, even Joseph Smith's, I don't know which version of the first vision he brought, the overcame by a dark spirit before God delivered him. That's
the official one from
1838. 1838. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. There were a lot of them, y'all. I think we're up to 9. Some circles say 7, some circles say 9 versions of the first vision, and all of them are slightly different and varied, and in some ways vastly different. But one of them is this idea that I was overcome by this horrific darkness, and then I was delivered by this beautiful light. And so we are creating this fear from the time, like we are instilling this fear in our children before they even have an opportunity to think for themselves. From the time they're itty bitty,
right.
It's good versus bad, righteous versus evil. I remember Brig would have been 6 the first time your mother suggested that we cast the devil out of him, because she identified those early signs that our son had schizophrenia. Your mom identified as he's possessed by a devil and wanted to do some sort of weird ass exorcism through a priesthood blessing.
That's in the New Testament, right? That comes with a precedent. Everybody, it would seem, and maybe I shouldn't use the word everybody.
Yeah, don't use the word everybody.
But from my recollection, every or nearly every situation in which Jesus was stated to have cast out the devil, that person was crazy.
Right.
There was craziness going on, what we would identify now as some sort of mental illness, like schizophrenia or whatever. So there's this precedent. That's what's going on. And so, I don't fault my mom for thinking that, but it didn't come with an empathy of what's going on or what we're struggling with.
Right. There was no trying to understand. It was very dismissive, again, which doesn't surprise us, very dismissive of the possibility of any kind of mental illness or cognitive disease or something along those lines. It was very much cast the devil out of him and then your kid will be normal. And I was like, how the hell does a devil get inside my 6-year-old? He's not even, according to Mormon doctrine,
it's in the New Testament.
At the age of accountability.
It's in the New Testament.
Well,
so the idea is there, but yeah, instead of cast out the devil, bless him and heal him, that kind of thing. Like at the time, at least, I very much believed in the authority and the power of the priesthood to heal. But that's not the way that the narrative is in the scriptures. Right.
Well, and I always think, kind of that culminating event where it's like, let's instill fear when things get difficult or unpredictable or your life isn't going the way you want. And let's blame all of that on Satan. And the kind of that pinnacle thing for me was when I went through the temple for the first time, and you've got, was it Michael Ballum? Who played Satan? Was it Michael Ballum?
Yeah.
Who played Satan? And he's like, if you do not live up to every covenant you have made in the altars of this temple on this day, you shall be in my power. Somebody give me an Oscar.
Ooh.
Give me a Tony.
Nah, it wasn't as good as him. Sorry.
Well, that's sexist. Anyway, so
Yeah.
we've got this even in the most sacred place on earth. Let me put in this fear wrench.
Yeah.
So what happens then for us? If I'm afraid that not reading my scriptures every day means that Satan is going to have more influence on my life, what am I going to do? I'm going to need to control that environment. You know, if I'm not having family home evening every Monday night, then my family is not going to learn the gospel well enough. And what's going to happen? And so I'm going to force all 7 of my little kids. You better sit still on the living room couch and be quiet. Yes, it's a Monday after school. Yes, the public school did not give you enough recess today. I don't care. Sit down, shut up, fold your arms, and we are going to traumatize you with this scriptural message. I mean, it did not take me long, y'all, to be like, all right, family home evening in this beautiful thing that they like show on TV. Yeah, that's not realistic. So, y'all, you know what? There's a story in the Bible, David and Goliath. David was a little guy. Goliath was a big guy. Let's pelt this giant paper reconstruction of Goliath in the living room with marshmallows. When we're done, we'll roast marshmallows and talk about you can choose the right when things feel really big. That was our lesson. Okay, so for those Mormons who are listening to this, feel free to steal my idea. It worked great. We probably did the story of David and Goliath more than any other Bible story during our Mormon family home evening because the kids love s'mores and throwing marshmallows at a guy that we made out of paper and taped to the wall to see how many pieces of the wall could fall down to kill him is a blast. All right? That's just what we did. But my point being that if I have to watch all my P's and Q's, I have to dot all my T's, dot all my I's, cross all my T's.
You're really messed up if you're dotting your T's and crossing your I's.
Have you seen my handwriting? The closer I get to a doctorate degree, the worse it gets. Should probably start that doctorate degree.
No, you're actually ahead of the game because that's a requirement.
To be a doctor
Yeah.
is you have to go through bad handwriting exams.
You have to, yeah.
They did that in the Army too, didn't they?
I got a doctorate degree.
Yes, you
I'm
did.
speaking from experience.
Okay. So, Army anesthesia course, handwriting, 666.
I have 2 more sets of verses for you too.
This is so bad. We are squirreling so bad, y'all. All right, go ahead, Mason.
So I want to kind of demonstrate a little bit of a I'm not sure what I'm going to demonstrate. You just can listen. This is
I'm trying to sound
King
smart.
Benjamin and Mosiah says, "And now I say unto you, my brethren, that after ye have known and have been taught all these things, if ye should transgress and go contrary to that which has been spoken, that ye do withdraw yourselves from the Spirit of the Lord, that it may have no place in you to guide you in wisdom's paths, that ye may be blessed, prospered, and preserved." I want to point out, just a pause here. It's making the case that if you choose not to follow the gospel, the Spirit has no place in your heart,
right?
Which is crap.
God's kind of a passive-aggressive dude in Mormonism.
Right. I say unto you that the man that doeth this, the same cometh out in open rebellion against God. Again, same thing, right? Therefore he listeth to obey the evil spirits, talking about Satan now,
Woo-hoo.
And becometh an enemy to all righteousness. Therefore the Lord has no place in him, for he dwelleth not in unholy temples. So now you've been cut off from God because you chose to walk away from what you quote unquote knew. Therefore, if that man repenteth not and remaineth and dieth an enemy to God, the demands of divine justice to awaken in his immortal soul to a lively sense of his own guilt, which doth cause him to shrink from the presence of the Lord, and doth fill his breast with guilt and pain and anguish, which is like an unquenchable fire whose flame ascendeth up forever and ever. And now I say unto you that mercy hath no claim on that man. Therefore his final doom is to endure a never-ending torment. If that isn't meant to scare the hell out of you.
He cussed.
No, just like specifically the hell out of you, right? If that
Right.
isn't meant to scare the hell out of you, I don't know what it is, because it's not comforting.
Right, well, and look at the language. You'll be an enemy to God.
Yes.
You are going to be condemned. You're an unholy temple. You are gloom and doom and all the bad things, and you won't be happy, and there's no mercy for you. Like, this is an isolating, ostracizing, othering thing in the scriptures. And if you don't repent of every little crooked eye look you give, you shall be in my power, right?
There's a lot of beware in those scriptures.
Right.
There's a lot of fear.
So when we're talking about our relationship with Satan, because if you are in a church, if you are in a religious system that believes in a higher power and a lower evil power, you have a relationship with both. May not be a healthy relationship with both, but you've got a relationship with both.
True.
Because if I just ignore you, Satan, then,
Well, and we can't just ignore him, because that's taught against it too, right? Like, we can't just ignore Satan. We got to pay attention and avoid Satan. Almost the pink elephant thing that you talked about last week, right?
But what a flawed idea, because honestly, if Satan wanted to destroy God's plan, all he has to do is do nothing. Like, seriously, if he's like, so the God's plan is that I have to tempt people so they fall down, so then they need God to get back to heaven. I'm going on vacation to Timbuktu, right?
Right.
Constantinople and Timbuktu, which is Istanbul.
If so much of the scriptures
right.
is about making us afraid of Satan so that we'll turn to God, you're right. Just
all Satan has to do is
Satan take a vacation. There's no fear of Satan.
Right.
And all the bad stuff goes away.
But then the Book of Mormon covers that one too, when there's that prophecy that,
that's the next verse I have.
Oh, go ahead, Mason, because this is me. Hang on. Sarah does not believe that Satan exists. I believe Satan is a total myth. Not sure about, God and stuff. I'm still working on that. But for me, Sarah Westbrook, Satan's like a Greek god. He's just a fantasy. He's a myth. He's a dark figure, whatever. He does not exist. And now I'm fulfilling scripture.
That's right. So I have a specific comment to make about this verse too, but this is in 2 Nephi. And this is where Nephi takes the time to explain to us all the ways that Satan is going to work in our lives. He says, "For behold, at that day shall he rage in the hearts of the children of men," speaking about Satan, "and stir them up to anger against that which is good." So the first thing he does is he's going to make us angry. Mm-hmm. The second thing, "and others will he pacify, and lull away into carnal security, that they will say, all is well in Zion. Yea, Zion prospereth, all is well, and thus the devil cheateth their souls, and leadeth them away carefully down to hell." So we can't be angry. We can't be passive. And just comfortable.
Meek and mild, but not passive. Got it?
"And behold, others he flattereth away, and telleth them there is no hell. And he saith unto them, I am no devil, for there is none. And thus he whispereth in their ears, until he grasps them with his awful chains, from whence there is no deliverance. Yea, they are grasped with death and hell, and death and hell and the devil and all that have been seized therewith must stand before the throne of God and be judged according to their works, from whence they must go into the place prepared for them, even a lake of fire and brimstone, which is endless torment." What I want to point out here is that in a lot of ways, he has described that essentially everything that happens in our lives has Satan's hand on it. If we're angry, well, Satan has his hand on that. If we become pacified in our comfort, Satan has his hand in that. Mm-hmm. If we start to believe Satan doesn't exist, he has his hand in that. If we are doing things that God doesn't approve of, well, Satan has his hand in that. And like you said, I think at the beginning, maybe it was just you and us talking. I thought it was in the podcast, but we give Satan too much control over our lives by believing that everything that he does, he has his hand in everything. And there's nothing that I feel like we're just afraid all the time.
Right.
Because, am I getting too passive? Maybe Satan's got me. Oh, I'm angry. Okay, Satan's got me. Oh, maybe Satan doesn't exist. Obviously, he's got me now. And it just, go ahead.
So let's talk about how this, go Mason, get on that soapbox, get on that tangent.
One more thought to that too. I think
you are so
shared,
hot when you get fired up.
I shared several weeks ago something that I'd thought of while I was in church, and the fact that I don't get to own anything in my life. Everything that is bad that happens is because Satan has had an influence on me or because I've been lazy. Everything that is good that has happened in my life, I have to give the glory to God, whether I want to or not. You know what? Some people are comfortable doing that. That's great. I don't think that's necessarily bad. But when you step back, I don't own anything. The good is God's. The bad is Satan's. I'm a schmuck. And I don't feel like that raises an adult. I don't feel like that allows someone to truly grow in his decisions the way that God supposedly wants us to do.
Well, and that takes us back to our episode with Wendy Wilcox Jensen, which is it stunts our spiritual and emotional growth. And remember, spirituality from a clinical perspective is our ability to connect in meaningful ways with other living things. And when we are so enmeshed in this good-evil battle that some existential something that we can't even actually tangibly hold on to, what's happening in our lives. So Mason, one of the things that we talked about is, that I said at the beginning of the podcast is, I've been working on this theory and this method and kind of researching as a hobby. Right. And in October of 2020, October 1st of 2020, I was thinking about some things, and I would like to say at this point in my life, I was probably a PMO. I was physically in. I was mentally very much on my way out. You can kind of hear, as I read this, you're going to hear kind of that, I'm trying hard to hang on to the doctrine, but I am challenging it pretty good. And one of the things that's really interesting is that I got a lot of response. This is one of my higher commented on posts ever. This is before I left the church. So the Mormon response of "Preach it, Sarah. I'm so glad you said that. Yes, you're right," was huge. Whereas if I posted this today, I'd probably get some crickets. cricket, which is fine.
Not crickets completely, but certainly not what you got from before.
Right, absolutely. So, and this is public, and I'm going to share this to the Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma Facebook page. So please head on over there. It's going to be up there. We would love to talk about it. So I will get that shared over there and have the Facebook moderators, make that whatever they do over there. I don't even look anymore because I'm like, whoa, too much stuff to do. So, I do look, let me rephrase that. When you comment and start a conversation, the moderator says,
we're watching for sure. Right. Yeah.
The moderator says, "Hey, Sarah, go take a look at that." And then I'm like, okay, I'll go take a look at that. And then I will engage with you. So yes, I'm not ignoring it. I'm just ignoring it until it needs my attention because I'm a busy lady, which is why I'm going to Florida and turning everything off. Okay, here we go. So October of 2020, Sarah Westbrook says on Facebook, "Thoughts from this morning's pondering. I was born and raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly known as Mormon or the LDS Church." Okay, so this is me demonstrating that I'm trying really hard not to have a win for Satan because I used the word Mormon.
Yes.
Mormon rock. Yeah.
It's Mormon rap. Get
rap.
it right.
Sorry. No, I had to laugh because, so squirrel, your uncle on that one podcast was like, and she's using this Mormon term, which is so distasteful for us. And I was like, it's only been distasteful since Nelson said it was.
Right.
Before that, we were proud of our little nickname. All right, here we go. "I am still a member of this faith, but often describe myself as being LDS with a lot of caution tape." Truth. I said that for years as I was deconstructing inside Mormonism. "I love the doctrine of Jesus Christ. It's pretty incredible. I hate the culture of shame that exists in many churches and religious groups, including the one I am part of." Proof that I've always been fascinated with this topic. Or have been for a long time. Not always, but for a long time. Okay, here we go. Sorry, it keeps squirrely. I'm so excited. This just gives me shivers.
Get through it already.
This proves that it was my idea first and John Larson came up with it second, at least to present it, and he just beat me to the punch.
Not a competition.
It is now. Alrighty, here we go. First off, we give Satan way too much credit for normal life experiences, like way too much credit. If I'm tired, exhausted, unmotivated, overwhelmed, burned out, angry, sad, bitter, etc., that does not mean Satan is controlling me. It absolutely does mean I'm not doing enough. It absolutely does not mean I'm not doing enough or not living righteously enough. God gave us emotions so that we would have warning signs or red flags to help us take care of and protect ourselves. If I'm angry, it means something has happened that I don't like, and I'm experiencing a red flag that helps me navigate what to do next. If I'm feeling overwhelmed, it's a red flag to help me recognize I need to slow down, take a break, ask for help. I'm going to add take a nap, etc. Second, if I'm struggling with not feeling close to my Savior, that does not mean Satan is a part of that. Can it mean that? Sure, but it doesn't. But does it mean that? No. If I'm a burned out mama because I'm sleep deprived, feeling lonely, and struggling with the constant wiping of butts and noses, chances are I'm going to have a difficult time concentrating and focusing. It's normal for mothers of young children to see a decline in their ability to communicate clearly, to feel more anxious, and even a bit or a lot bit more emotional. Not, quote unquote, feeling the spirit could just mean your brain needs a rest in order to be, quote unquote, in tune. That's not Satan. That's normal life. Third, the LDS Church teaches that God will always talk to us when we seek him. The Bible supports this belief. The issue is when we don't feel like we are getting answers, we often blame ourselves or criticize others for needing to repent first, or that we aren't living righteously enough to hear God. That's bullshit. Remember, Jesus hung out in the hood. He's not a snob, and he is comfortable talking to everyone, always, no matter how good or bad we think we are, no matter what sins we are struggling with, he is always ready to listen, always. Sometimes, due to a struggle or trauma, we have a hard time hearing anything because our brain needs time to heal first. That's not Satan. That's the normal healing process. Be kind to yourself. Struggle is not sin. Struggle is an opportunity for learning. Nothing grows without struggle. Strength comes from heavy lifting. I have a client who works in a prison. She says the prison is the most spiritual place I have ever experienced. Jesus walks those hallways. You will never fall so far that God won't come to you when you ask. Okay, I might be taking a spin off of Jeffrey R. Holland right there.
I think so.
I like mine better. Anyway, you may not feel him because of trauma or life is just kicking your ass, but he is there. Knowing that and trusting that he is there, even if you can't feel or hear him, is called faith. He loves everyone, always. Those were my thoughts from right before I officially left the church. I think I officially left in January.
Of 21?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think I'm only 2 years out, like officially out.
It's been a long 2 years.
Yeah, you poor soul. It's been a good 2 years. It's been a liberating 2 years. I mean, all bullshit aside, it has been liberating.
I love that you normalize life in that statement that you made. That you make it okay to go, you know what? I'm a mom. I can barely talk right now. This doesn't have anything to do with Satan. It doesn't have anything to do with God. It has to just do, it's just life. This is just
biology.
The way that it is.
I'm sleep deprived, y'all. It's biology.
Right. There's a lot going on for that new mom. There's a lot going on for that mom of 7 kids, or for that mom of 2 kids, or for that newly married woman who's in a completely different situation, or that 19-year-old kid who's out there working a real job for the first time trying to support a family.
Really glad you got off the women thing. So I was going to say this happens to men too.
Absolutely.
Jobs not working well. Bosses being an asshole.
That 45-year-old man who gets fired. Like, there is a lot going on.
Or laid off. Right.
And that doesn't have anything to do with Satan. It might have something to do with us. Sometimes we certainly cause problems. You know, you might have gotten fired because you're a douche, right? I don't know. But it doesn't mean that Satan is at work in your life. Now, if you have a strong belief in God and Satan, maybe Satan is at work in your life and is involved, but we give that idea too much power, not too much credit, too much power in our lives.
I like that, Mason. So I'd like to kind of come back to this codependency thing. So in what ways then are we allowing this fear of this evil influence or Satan to affect us so that we feel the need to control everything? What are some ideas that you have, Mason? Because I got a whole list in my head.
I need you to ask that question again. I think it was a very good question, and I want to make sure I caught all the little pieces of it.
You realize I can't do that. Like, I'd have to rewind and... Okay, let me just try again.
Try again.
Okay. Let me just rephrase it, actually. So when we talk about codependent behavior, what we're talking about is a need to control others or our environment in an unhealthy way to protect ourselves from that unpredictability, threats, real or imagined, that it doesn't feel safe for me, so I have to control it so I feel safer. So my question is, how then are we, you and me, Mason, are post-Mormons or something Mormon over there. I don't know what you are right now or how you identify right now. But how does this present in our lives, this codependency in relationship to this fear of Satan? Wow, that was a thoughtful sigh.
It was a good question. I've always believed that a good question deserves some time to think about it.
Oh, absolutely.
Of course, on the air, that's a little bit different. So you might just hear a little silence.
Silence is bad for on the air, apparently. I don't think our listeners have ever experienced that because I don't shut up.
I think that religion tries to answer the existential questions that we can't just answer on our own. And by doing that, it tries to make us believe, whether or not it's true, I'm not making a judgment call on the belief, but it tries to make us believe that religion understands where we came from, why we're here, where we're going. And so they interpose, I'm not sure if that's the right word, but they put pieces into our lives that are meant to explain all of that. And so if life is about suffering, like Buddhism claims, and as a religion, you're supposed to have the answers as to why that happens, if you can create this situation in which there is black and white, dark and light, good and evil, then you start to gain control over other people. And eventually those people stuck in this situation will seek to have the same sort of control over what they have influence on. And that's how we form this codependency on those things, because we can't survive without the answers that come from that, but at the same time we're completely overwhelmed and not surviving well by the answers that come from that. Does that make sense at all?
Well, it's a very interesting thought that did not answer the question I asked.
Oh, good.
So I think that that's something that is probably going to need a little bit further explanation or exploration. So I'm going to give you a minute to think about that, and I'll answer my own question. And then let's come back to what you're trying to say, because I can definitely see as you were doing that, like I could literally see the wheels turning in your head because you had your poop face on. And I love you. Okay. So one of the things, let's take this outside of Mormonism and maybe give a clear example. So Jinger, Duggar, Vuolo just wrote, and I hope I pronounced her name correctly, had a book that came out recently. Let me tell you what this is called. I have not read it, so I can't recommend the book yet because it's not one that I've read. It's not showing up even though I already bought it. Let's try this again. It's not coming up. Okay, let me find it. Actually, Mason, can you look up Jinger Duggar's new book, and then we can say what the title of it is. But in her promotion of this new book, she talked about things or ideas that she grew up with to try and avoid the influence of evil or Satan in her life. And so things for her were like, we didn't listen to music that had drums in it. Because if we listen to music with drums, Satan's in control of the drums, and then that means we're inviting Satan into our home. And so that codependency on Satan is because I can't have Satan be a risk in my life, I can't listen to music with drums.
Can't even take the risk, right? Yeah.
Can't even take their... So, like, yeah. I remember watching, 17 and Counting and then Counting On and 19 and Counting and all of these other things.
Right.
I remember watching that going, oh, this is culty. Like, they look good on TV. They look like they have things all together, and yeah, they don't.
Well, and in some ways, they probably did have a lot of things together, but
things like if there was a woman that wasn't dressed like them, they were all taught to the men were taught to look at the floor. So literally, the men never made eye contact with anybody because if they saw some skin, Satan's in their life, and they're going to have erections and all of these other things. And I'm like, well, I don't know what you got to do because teenage boys have erections when the wind changes direction or when the door opens or when the water fountain trickles. Like, that's normal, healthy life. And yet we have to control that because getting aroused is evil unless you're getting aroused to the person you're going to get married to.
Right.
In Mormonism, I look at this as things like if you drink tea, or I don't think they ever said tea, it was hot drinks. If you have hot drinks, Satan's going to have control of you. Therefore, you can't drink those. And if you do...
Specifically stated at the end of the Word of Wisdom Revelation, it talks about, you'll run and not be weary and walk and not faint, but it says that the destroying angel shall pass you by. There's a connection again. Satan is involved in this process.
Right, but if you look at the Word of Wisdom, how much time do we spend on controlling the things you're not supposed to do?
Oh, lots. Like there's
rather than doing the things you're supposed to do, like
there's no control
eat fruits
whatsoever.
And vegetables aplenty.
Right.
Not very much meat. Mormons love their red meat, y'all. They are carnivores for the most part.
Not any more than any other group, probably.
But the one that we're focusing on is this unknown substance of hot drink, which in the day that it was given meant temperature hot, and later it was caffeine, tea, coffee, and then it was herbal tea is okay, or green tea is okay. Never really officially, and now Nelson nixed the green tea too, and then it was, well... Yeah, whatever. I'll go on and on.
Right, okay. Not really the point.
Let me get back in. But we're controlling the very food we put in our mouth or the very drink we put in our mouth, because if we don't, Satan will have power over us. If I don't get all of my visiting and home teaching done or ministering done or whatever it is done, if I don't serve a mission, if I don't get my kids to Wednesday night activities, if my kids are too noisy in church, if somebody cusses, I've had clients, and I want to just put this caveat out. When I say I have a client who, I am mixing up client stories, and I am not talking about a specific client because I've got to protect that confidentiality. But in my clinical time, I have seen Mormon couples who are going to get divorced because their partner will not stop drinking coffee, because their partner will not stop smoking, because their partner will cuss, because their partner doesn't wear their garments when they are working out. So when we talk about this codependent control that you have on your life in order to keep the threat of Satan's chaos at bae. We're talking about the clothes you wear, the way you do your hair, how much makeup you wear, how you get your ears pierced, how you don't get your ears pierced, if you get tattoos, if you don't get tattoos, who you date, who you sleep with, what you eat, what you drink, your underwear. You know, I still remember being in Fayetteville and having the Elders Quorum president tell me he could see my garments and I probably needed to dress more modestly. I was a nursing mother, and when I looked down, the only thing you could see was right at my shoulder, the little peekaboo lace of the shoulder of my garment. And I wanted to look right at him and say, you know what? F*** you. Stop looking at my underwear. I'm going to go tell your wife you're looking and commenting on my underwear. You know what? Better yet, I'm going to go tell my husband you are looking at and commenting on my underwear. Like, what is up with that? What? You're laughing. What church from God is so focused on how my underwear fits?
I'm laughing.
It's ridiculous.
Because I don't know if I could see you having done that at the time, but I could totally see you doing that now, exactly like you just said, and it would just make me laugh because I understand now. Maybe I didn't understand then. I don't think I did.
No, when I told you about it then, you were like, well, you probably do need to be more careful about your shoulders. And I think that was about the same time that I said, I can see your garments right here, right under your Adam's apple. You probably need to wear turtlenecks. And you were kind of like, oh. So see, I wouldn't have said it to that individual at the time, but I sure as hell would have said it to you.
and you did in a relatively gentle way, but yeah.
Well, I was gentle the first or second time. Then I was a little bit snarky.
Wait, you were snarky?
I was snarky. Yes, I was snarky. All right, so Mason, those are the ways that we tend to control. That was kind of like the, I asked you a question where I already knew the answer. Probably not fair. And I want to give you a chance to come back to that thought. But I want to challenge before you're shaking your head. Are you not wanting to come back to that thought?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
I'm not sure I have more thoughts on that, but you're fine. Finish your thought and then
then I'll let you look at
head down that path.
So, really the question is, how do I challenge the need to control every aspect of my life? How can I release some of that control, accept things as natural brain states, me just being human? How do I do that? And we've talked a lot about this in the past about, recognizing it, naming it, leaning into it, completing the emotional cycle, discharging, blah, blah, blah. We've talked about those systems in the past. Yes, Mason?
Oh, you can finish your thought.
Okay. But
I have an answer to that question.
Okay, but I want to come back to the subtitle of Codependent No More, because it says how to stop controlling others, or how to stop over-functioning and controlling your own environment as well, and start caring for yourself. Selfishness is healthy, and I know a lot of people are going to buck against that, but self-care is healthy. And being able to, once again, I think I said this yesterday, I'm kind of on the serenity prayer kick, which is that radical acceptance, or accepting the things you don't have control over and moving forward. Those are the things that you're going to need to do to start this process of releasing the tendency to try and over control, that toxic perfectionism, is lean into imperfection and accept it. Like Brene Brown's Gifts of Imperfection, The Power of Vulnerability, where she talks about embracing and talking about your vulnerability in a way that is really, really transparent and authentic to you, heals overfunctioning. Learning how to trust. When we go to this book, that this Codependent No More book, the overarching theme is trying to control the alcoholic, or trying to control your environment so the alcoholic can't hurt you anymore, is toxic. And you actually become more toxic than the person who's struggling with alcoholism. Like the person with alcoholism has an addiction issue and a behavior issue around alcohol, but does usually well in most of the other areas of their life. But the sober person is crazy. That's literally what she basically says in here in more professional terms.
Yeah.
And it's because if I don't feel like I'm in control, so I try and control every aspect of my life, I am expending so much energy that I am not able to focus on the relationships and how it's affecting the people around me.
And it feels a lot like you're trying to control all the things that ultimately don't matter in an attempt to control the things that do matter that you can't control.
Right.
And I think that's why it becomes so fruitless and so toxic is all your focus is on these things that you can control but don't matter. And you're hoping that those things will somehow help you control the things that you can't control. You ultimately don't have any control over how somebody else behaves.
Right.
Yeah, so that's it. So in Luke, one of the things that I do love about the scriptures is that sometimes the message or the answer that is given is so very simplistic that it oftentimes will reach the depths that I feel like it needs to. So the answer to the question, how do we move on? How do we not be codependent? And how do we take care of ourselves? I love this. And maybe it's just the way that I read it. But I'd like to venture that this is the answer. It's Luke 6:37. Jesus says, "Judge not, and ye shall not be judged. Condemn not, and ye shall not be condemned. Forgive, and ye shall be forgiven." And what I love about this is that it takes us from this outward look of trying to control everything around us and focuses it on what I decide to do with my life. If I can get to the place where I feel no need to judge someone else or condemn someone else, where I'm in a healthy place, like we talked about last week, I'm in a healthy place where forgiveness is possible, I have nothing to worry about. Jesus said, "Judge not, and ye shall not be judged. Condemn not, and ye shall not be condemned. Forgive, and you shall be forgiven." It's almost like he's saying, the behaviors that you're concerned about, I don't really care about that. The way that you're treating the people around you and the enmity that you're spitting out towards them, that matters a lot to me. Mostly because I find it very difficult to be healthy when I'm constantly looking at other people and trying to figure out how they could fix themselves. I don't feel very healthy in that place.
Or when you're looking at yourself and nitpicking on every little detail that you're not doing, quote unquote, right.
Yeah.
This isn't just about others. This is also about
I don't
you.
feel very healthy in that place. And so I love I feel like this is very profound. Just don't judge. Don't condemn. Forgive. And everything is going to be sorted out. Right. And I want to add the caveat that this isn't a forgiveness like just it's okay.
Right.
This is a forgiveness.
Go back to the last podcast that we did. This is a forgiveness after you've taken accountability for your own healing.
Yes.
Okay.
This is a forgiveness that is coming from a place of health and well-being in yourself. I'm giving forgiveness because I'm in a good place. Yeah. And so I feel like that's a very profound piece if you're looking for that scriptural answer, which I sometimes am.
Right.
I feel like that's kind of what the Savior is saying there, and that's the answer to not being codependent.
I like it. The last thought I want to leave you with is that when we are struggling with codependency, we tend to blame the source that makes us uncomfortable for our problems, which means that we are not very good at taking accountability for the choices and decisions that we're making in a way that actually leads to behavioral change or understanding of our emotional state. So, for example, in Melody's book, she talks about how the person that is struggling with codependency blames everything bad from, the dog shit on the carpet to the car blew up in the parking lot to you left the church on the alcoholic, even though the dog pooping on the carpet has nothing to do with the fact that you went out and drank last night, unless, of course, you were supposed to come home and let the dog out and nobody else did it. Maybe I can make that connection. But what ends up happening in codependence is that you shift the blame of the bad things going on to the perceived perpetrator.
Right.
And so, Mason, one of the things you said earlier was, I don't really own anything because the bad things are because Satan has influence on me. So I'm really struggling here because Satan's got a hold of me. I'm blaming Satan for my faults. But everything good is now God's. I get to give the good stuff to God, and the bad stuff I blame Satan for. We've got to also begin to start accepting accountability. I can't be mad at you, Mason, for the dogs peeing on the floor if I walked past them 6 times while they were asking to go out and I didn't let them out. Because, in our home, it's like, okay, one of the dogs peed on the floor. Who saw the dog ask to go out? And all the kids are like, well, me. Landon walked by the door. He didn't do it. I was like, no, we've got to be able to say, shoot, I missed that signal. I wasn't paying attention to the time. I didn't let them out, so on and so forth. So we've got to be able to take accountability for our role in things, especially when we're working in mixed faith relationships. It's really common for both people, the one that's within and the one that's without the church now, to blame the other one for the problems. It's like, I know, Mason, for us, it was, Mason, why aren't you looking at this stuff? If you would just look to understand, then all of our problems would disappear. And for you, it's like, you broke the contract and you're destroying our family and I don't want to get influenced by Satan. Therefore, I'm not going to really listen to all this stuff.
I can't even look at you anymore.
Right, I got to bring Sarah back here.
Definitely can't
because
listen.
Satan's got her, and your family, she's been deceived. She's being led away. It's all Satan's fault. No, it's not. Let's take accountability. I did some research and I outgrew this stuff. It just doesn't work for me anymore. I don't even really believe in Jesus being the savior of the world. I believe he's a historical figure and am really fascinated as I study more about the historical Jesus. You, Mason, still find great peace in looking to the scriptures and finding or viewing Jesus as your personal savior, as a figure of divinity. And that's great. That works for us. I don't need to poo-poo on that in order for our marriage to work. I need to take accountability for the way I'm talking to you, for the way I'm approaching difficult conversations, for the way that we're nurturing and connecting our relationship. And as I do that, and as you do that, we're going to be just fine, even though we have significant religious differences. You have to take accountability and accept the things you cannot change.
Yeah, well, and to go along with this accountability, this is one of those thoughts that I have at the end of the podcast that maybe I shouldn't bring up because we have no time to discuss it.
Yeah, Mace, we've got 4 minutes left.
I'm going to bring it up because I want you as the listener to ponder this one. I don't think we'll ever come back to this in a podcast, and maybe we will. But I don't know if you noticed in all this talk about codependency, certainly with a focus on Satan and how we form this codependent relationship with him. I don't know if you've noticed that a lot of what we talked about also kind of lends itself to the idea that we might have a codependent relationship with God as well.
Oh, I love it. Yes.
And it's not healthy. The point behind this whole podcast was recognizing that codependency, not healthy at all. And so if we can recognize that we have a codependent relationship with Satan, but we also might have a codependent relationship going on with God, let's sort through that. Let's ponder that on our own. Let's see if we can figure out how we can work through that and form a healthier relationship.
Because remember, codependency is also defined as a relationship addiction.
Yes.
And in extreme forms, we see people do really horrible things in their proclamation that this is God's will.
Yep.
That they're speaking to God. Look at the
Giving
Lafferty
it to
brothers.
God. This is all
Look at
God.
the Catholic
Yep.
Crusades.
Yep.
Look at Mountain Meadows Massacre. Like, this is a big deal.
Yeah. Well, and I'm
Yes.
not talking about big organizations, but individuals
Oh,
too.
absolutely.
I think that we develop those. And
Absolutely,
yeah.
I agree.
So-
I love that thought. So we'll have to grow that. So Mason, did you have anything else you wanted to add before we close up tonight?
Just one thing you asked for the title of the book from Jill Duggar. It is Growing Up Duggar.
No.
That's the only book I've seen on there, so there might be another one.
There's a new one. Yeah, you.
Okay.
Okay, let me.
Well, that was the only thing that I had to offer.
Yeah, you got it wrong.
The Hope We Hold, Finding Peace in Promises of God.
Nope. It's by. Are you putting in Jinger Duggar? Jinger.
Oh, that's Jill, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wrong J sister.
Anyway, if you see it on the show notes, you'll know that it's there.
No, go ahead and look it up. We can. I'll fill the space. Ready? Here we go. Twinkle, twinkle,
that's helpful.
little star. I used to have a beautiful singing voice, and then like my
Becoming Free Indeed.
Yes,
My story of disentangling faith from fear.
yes, it was
Ooh.
released in January of 23. And my understanding is that Jinger, and I was not aware of this book. I actually had one of our listeners was like, hey, have you seen this? You should interview Jinger Duggar on your podcast because she would have some great insight, because the religious leader they were following was even worse than, like Joseph Smith and Mormonism.
Right.
And so this recommendation came from a listener, and I'm really excited. I'm planning on listening to that book on Audible while I'm on the plane to and from Florida over this next week. And so I'm really excited about that. And then my thoughts just went away. I don't remember. Oh, I was talking about my singing voice. I used to have a beautiful singing voice, and then I got acid reflux so bad it ate away at my larynx a little bit. Now it's a little bit, grovelly and not as beautiful and strong. So
Thanks
thank
for
you.
listening today. Thanks for joining us in our discussion of codependency and how that affects our lives. And of course, if we can become aware of something that is toxic in our life, that's how we figure out how to work through it and
Absolutely.
and repair that in our lives.
Thank you, Mason. Yes, thank you, Mason. And thank you to our listeners. We hope that as you listen to our podcasts, you can learn new skills. You can grow into the person you're really trying to grow into and become the best you in a very healthy space. Thanks so much. See you next time.
Love you guys.
Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma is hosted by me, Sarah Westbrook, and my husband, Mason Westbrook. Produced by Daisy Girl Communications and Alex Vidalis. Our music today was Moving Forward by Run to Life. Y'all, one of the most missed... I'm like not even 5 seconds in, and I've already messed up my words.
Better start over. We don't want to see you in your imperfectness.
I'm gonna flip you off.
Well, at least they won't be seeing that.
Doot. Look, I have two of them up, and I'm shaping my eyebrows. Take a look at me, Mason. Aren't I beautiful?
Wow,
All right,
she's using the wrong fingers to shape her eyebrows. That's what I'm going to say.
Are you dying over there? Did you inhale your water? Y'all, he drank some water, and now he's going to die. Do I need to come give you CPR?
No, I think
stick
I'm
my
okay.
tongue in your mouth when I give you CPR. You
Oh,
want me to
yeah,
come?
I'm totally gonna
All right,
do
let me
that.
let me
Come on
pause this. Hey, Alex, we're gonna pause real quick.
It comes
for
with a precedent, right? Like everybody,
You interrupted.
everybody. I'm just